Welcome to the third of the series in the revelation of the Holism evolution graph. So if you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, well, tough. You're just going to have to kind of make it up as you go along, because we are heading now into the spirit, religion, indigenous knowledge realm. So the first thing I want to mention to you is, let's just remember the intimacy between the kind of soul-mind experience of the kind of outer scientific manifest physical parts. Without the parts, there is no mind experience. And not just that, the kind of higher ones, the reality that we build for ourselves, none of that's possible without thinking, feeling, and doing, and all the other things that make up the substructures. So that's why I've done this graph the way that I have, with kind of a narrowing going down to the right-hand side. And the other reason why I've got this narrowing coming down to the right-hand side is because it feels to me that the qualitative aspects of how the spirit realm, the spiritual world, is portrayed seems to be something that is portrayed in the human experience that, according to this graph and according to my reality and according to what religions are saying, and many modern people having certain experiences, and the near-death experiences are probably the easiest ones to draw on here, is they're very much aligned with themselves. Just very briefly, the kind of picture from the New Testament of the Pentecost, where there's this body of flame moves into the room, it subdivides out and lands as tongues of flame individually on the disciples or apostles, and suddenly they have knowledge they didn't have before. There's this blessed state that they are soaked in, and so on. And the nature or the quality of this as being flame and healing and knowing, well, that was already described in Hinduism, where Brahman is portrayed like this huge body of flame, and how we get these partitions of flame that descend upon the enlightened, and that's called Atman, these individualized flames. So these are not new ideas. All religions in their own way carry a similar story. In the Old Testament, you've got the burning bush, and this is holy ground. Again, this concept of flame and wisdom and sacredness and so on. So religions all move towards that, and there's very definite drive coming out of all of them to encourage human beings to keep their eyes and attention focused on that, because somehow that has a picture or a sense of that's the future. So the concept that I have, the spirit self, or this narrowing down, the manifesting of the spirit into the human personality as spirit self, it's obviously based on all of those ideas. Okay, so that's pretty fine to think, all right, well, that's religious world. What about indigenous knowledge? You know, in New Zealand, I lived for many years, and there are these big volcanoes in the middle of the North Island, and there are traditions of not looking up among the Maori because of a deep reverence and awe for the power and magnificence of the being of the mountain. There are river beings, taniwha, that are also understood and respected, and one develops a working relationship with it. And there's wonderful stories, and it's all around the world, all different cultures who acknowledge the presence of various nature spirits, as I call them. And so these nature spirits, or also portrayed in the European fairy tales, all kinds of creatures and beings, are pretty universal in all indigenous knowledge systems. So either people in the past were just had incredible imaginations, just made stuff up as they go along, or there is something substantially real about it. Now, in my research, I also looked at modern people who have experiences of such beings, and there's quite a wide range. People who've communicated with leprechauns in Ireland, and again, they've got a very long history of people having relationships with them, or an understanding, or being able to experience them in some form. And then, of course, the other fairy tales from Europe, but all over, indigenous knowledge everywhere carries an understanding. So that's pretty universal. That's pretty widespread, and it's pretty intimate in terms of the experience. This is pre-scientific culture. So the rational mind hasn't made stuff up for the purpose of something. There's no rational manipulation that would have been, I think, possible out of those indigenous systems. So there does seem to be some validity in that, both from the historical record as well as from people in the modern day who claim to have such experiences. I've also put animal spirits there because there are also people who claim to be able to speak, communicate with animals telepathically, mostly. But then also we know with our own pets, all kinds of interesting kinds of communication take place. But that there is a presence, there is some being greater or bigger sometimes that is accessible to us. And people who I researched who do have that kind of communication tend to describe that form of communication as gestures rather than speech. And it's all seen in the imagination, of course. So there's nothing externally manifest. There's no animal saying, wow, that was, whatever. No, it's not that kind of communication. So it does step outside of the realm of the conventional relationships that we think of between mind and body into something, a kind of an imagination, a kind of a envisaging, which fits into what I am calling there the realm of the spirit or the realm of religion within the indigenous knowledge systems. Now, there is someone who did some amazing work, and Goethe really inspired me to put this graph together because of an experience that he had, which he termed the Urpflanz, the archetypal plant. And he describes it in the most beautiful, I mean, he's a poet as well. He's an author. And if you don't know his history, just look up in the German-speaking world. He's a very respected and revered character. But his scientific work is not often recognized. So what he did is he studied plants, unusual plant phenomena. And by observing all the different phenomena, literally outer, manifest, objective, he artistically, he allowed all these impressions, instead of trying to be abstract or theoretical or philosophical about it, he just let the reality speak to his being and let his imagination integrate these into their own shape and form. He trusted the holistic integrative process, the kind of intuitive process, to do its work. And of course, he had his rational faculties acting on them at the same time, and that would shape what he would see, and then would doubt what he was seeing, and so between the rational and intuitive, forwards and backwards. And on an occasion, he had a perception of a kind of a flame-like glowing presence. And this presence he regarded as the archetypal plant, and he was very taken by it, like a true revelation, where he described this as saying, wow, from this presence, he can see how every kind of plant manifestation has come about. And more than that, because it's logically connected and relatable to this presence that he experienced, this kind of creative presence of all plant life. And more than that, what he also recognized in this Urpflanz is the possible for a multitude of different plant manifestations which haven't yet come about, but that he wouldn't be surprised if they would come about because they would be logically associatable with this creative archetype presence. And that gave me the insight to think that perhaps that's what all of these nature spirits and so on are. They are creative archetypal presences that stand behind everything that is manifest, and hence how this graph began to take shape. And of course, it took a while for this graph to take shape. But I loved Goethe's approach because it's very scientific, and it allows us, with our very modern thinking, to begin to engage upon a recognition that standing behind everything manifest isn't just our subjective experiences of them, light and heat and thoughts and so on, logic, but there is actually some creative principle, and there has to be anyway, because where does mind come from if it comes from plants? There's some emergence. There must be something working, and as you can see, this entire graph is a kind of a teleological, a kind of step-by-step evolutionary development that doesn't seem random. It doesn't seem as we often think of with Darwin's evolutionary theory. And Darwin was a religious man himself. I don't think he would have imagined it to altogether be random. He still recognized a strong spiritual presence for his own life, or at least that's the impression I have. So it doesn't seem unreasonable that behind everything manifest, there could be something unmanifest that is perceptible, but of course not using our normal senses, nor our conventional thoughts and feelings, but something that's evolved. And I think Goethe gives us a bit of a clue or a key there, how scientifically we can work to develop those kinds of insights. And we know anyway, that's how scientific breakthroughs happen. Maybe not to the degree that Goethe came to recognize some, have a real spiritual experience of some flame-like presence, but certainly insights. And there are plenty examples of that, of scientists coming to new insights in dreams and so on. Okay, then the human being, growing personality, what stands behind us? Well, most indigenous knowledge recognize or acknowledge the role of the ancestors, the fact that we have some presence that remains behind, and that this presence has a relationship to the manifest world still and to human lives, and that humans can access the insights and wisdom and presence of the ancestors, and they are part of our lives. They're with us. And again, turning to my Maori experiences in New Zealand, there's a beautiful greeting that I learned there. You say tena koutou, tena koutou, tena koutou katoa, and you say it 3 times. Like, what's that about? Well, you're greeting the ancestors, you're greeting the immediate family, and then you're greeting the individual, really feeling not just an autoethnographic, the individual and their ethnographic environment, but even an ancestral presence that stands behind them. And when we come to the reincarnating part, and that's really interesting because in the Christian world that I live in, there's very much a sense like, no, that's not real. It can't be real. But there's a lot of research in the West, even in the Christian speaking in the Christian world, on reincarnation. Young kids who remember previous lives, and researchers who go and delve into the information that the kids speak about, try and find evidence for it. And there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of well-documented cases. And that's in the West. Of course, in the East, it's just taken for granted that that's going to be real because that's part of their belief structure. But even in the West, where it's not part of the belief structure predominantly, there's still good research showing evidence for that. Now, you obviously will, if you have a particularly strong view, and probably from a Christian perspective, because even in Judaism, I found evidence of it, reincarnation, and it's not an unacceptable belief. In Islam, although there's not much that I found in the modern day, certainly Rumi, I think the 13th or 11th century or 9th century, I don't remember, Islamic philosopher, poet, he talks about this evolutionary scale, matter, life, mind, and so on. So he definitely has some sense of some evolutionary and reincarnating thing. I died as this and came back as that. So I'm not sure where Islam fully stands on that, but my sense is like Christianity, they have a bit of a shaky relationship to reincarnation. But of course, Hinduism and Buddhism have a very strong relationship to it. And I challenge you to go and read some bits in the New Testament if you are Christian, to try and find aspects of reincarnation. I myself have done so and have found several places. And you can Google them. I mean, there are various people who've looked into that. But that's all I wish to say on that for the moment, because I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm just trying to say how I became convinced that there is this incredible relationship of behind all of these manifest smut substances, there seems to be something in the spirit realm that is unmanifest, that seems to be encouraging or part of driving the evolution and the manifesting down in the outer objective world. One last point on those before we move into the spirit self, and that is that if we really are honest with ourselves scientifically, we do not know what energy is, we do not know what matter is, and we don't know what life is or mind or any of these things. Fundamentally, we don't actually know what each of these outer observable manifest substances actually are. on a kind of a general scale, yes, we know plenty. We can study their interactions and aspects of it. But primarily, what is energy? What is matter? These are questions that we still haven't answered, meaning, for me, that we need a different kind of thinking. We need a different kind of an approach to gain a sense. It's a little bit like asking, like, who am I? Which is, of course, the eternal human debate. Who are we as human species? And then who am I as an individual? What is my destiny? And if anyone should know us, it's ourselves. And yet, even that we don't seem to know. So it does seem like there is something missing in our entire approach to reality. And then as we move into this next step, the religions claim the most extraordinary things about what we will be able to know and how we will be able to experience. So in Christianity, we call it the Holy Spirit, which descends like this tongue of flame. And when you read the New Testament, especially Paul's writings and so on, he writes very beautifully about how our orientation to the world, it does tend to make it a bit of a dichotomy, the flesh and the spirit. And of course, the flesh I see is everything in the body, the physical, the science. And he tends to disparage that a bit, and possibly, some might argue in an unhealthy way, because it's a fundamental part of us. But every time you look at any of the religions, it's all a matter of release, of evolution. And that's part of the development, I think, of the personality to the spirit self. And I'm not going to go into much detail of that. We'll in all likelihood do that in a further video, because it's crucial as an educator. I want to put out there also some ideas as to how we can challenge our modern ideas of education to work towards the manifesting of this Atman, Holy Spirit, and so on. So thank you very much for watching this. I really hope that it's been interesting for you. And if it is, watch the other videos, drink it deep, think wide and broadly, and examine, start questioning everything from this kind of perspective. Because in my own science class, when I'm teaching now stuff from a scientific thing, I draw straight on the inner experiences that we have and the presences of that stand behind. My students love it. Many of them are religious, of course, and they really value the possibility to create some kind of a bridge between what otherwise kind of splits our soul apart. One part of us is this religious, devoted being who knows that we are imperfect and sinners, or whatever language you wish to use for that, and that we need to work on ourselves. We need to evolve. Okay, why? Is it some God being that's challenging us to do so? And if so, like, what's the point? So we need some rationality from, I believe, a scientific perspective, and that's what I've tried to do here, to bring a scientific aspect into our religious understanding, to say, yes, thank you, religions, because you've stood the test of time. You've helped humans really evolve over a long period of time. And if we're honest about our science, well, without some sense of higher purpose and morality, we are destroying our planet at a tremendous speed. And so we really need to find ways to bring about a new understanding. And that's what I'm hoping holism will be able to do for us. And that's what I'm believing this graph, for myself anyway, is helping me to do. And honestly, I find it deeply rewarding, and I hope that you will do the same. So thank you very much for watching. I do hope it's been rich and rewarding for you. And check out all my other videos, please, in my Holism, whatever they call it, site group. I'm new at this, forgive me. But enjoy it, and all the best constructing a reality that you can defend in as many ways as possible. Go well.